Wes Calder had once been a man defined by motion. He had roamed the deserts of Nevada and Utah with a rifle on his back and the sun in his eyes, tracking bighorns, pumas, and the occasional poacher who thought the wilderness had no law. But now, at 43, Wes found himself standing behind the counter of a hardware store in a quiet Arizona town, watching dust settle on hammers and lawn chairs. Divorce, as it often does, had a way of dulling his edges. His ex-wife, Linda, had left him for a radiologist in Tucson, someone who wore clean shirts and never smelled like campfire. The split had been clean in paperwork, but messy in spirit. Linda had taken the house and the dog. Wes took his guilt and his silence. The store's fluorescent lights hummed like insects. The radio droned out country songs with a melancholy twang. He spent most of his shifts fixing price tags and avoiding the glances of customers who remembered him differently, as the guide, the outdoorsman, the man who once led expeditions through the unforgiving wild. Now he sold bug spray. Wes didn't blame anyone for moving on. Hell, even his own reflection seemed to be forgetting him. His eyes, once sharp with sun-honed confidence, had grown soft. His shoulders hunched. His beard was starting to go gray. He wondered sometimes if this was it, if this was all life had left for him. Aisles of paint cans, mid-morning coffee, and evenings spent alone watching the news on mute. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, just as he was counting drill bits and cursing the new shipment paperwork, the bell over the door chimed. She walked in like a gust of dry wind, tall, pale, wrapped in a sun-faded duster that trailed behind her like the tail of a comet. Her hair was dark, braided tight, and her eyes scanned the store not with curiosity, but calculation. She moved like someone used to being in dangerous places. "Wes Calder?" she asked, stepping up to the counter. He blinked. "Yeah, that's me. I'm Dr. Aileen Graves. I'm leading a research team into the Hogback Mesa next week. I need a guide who knows the terrain." Wes frowned. "That's oil field land. Dead zone. They shut that area down years ago." "I know. That's why we need someone who's been there before." He hadn't heard that name, Hogback, in years. It wasn't the kind of place people liked to remember. Locals avoided it, hunters whispered about it. A rocky mesa with strange winds and even stranger stories. Sudden disappearances, twisted wildlife, even rumors of radiation. Wes had only gone once, years ago, on a solo hunt. He'd come back with no game and no clear memories of why he left early. "So you're a paleontologist?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Geobiologist," she corrected. "There's something buried in the rock layers. Fossils, maybe, unidentified, old. We've got satellite data that suggests this area hasn't been touched in centuries. I need a field guide who won't run from a few bad legends." Wes hesitated. Everything in him told him to say no, to stay in his predictable, colorless life. But there was something in her eyes, calm but urgent, scientific but secretive, that stirred a piece of him he thought had gone numb. "I don't guide anymore," he said, almost out of habit. "I'll pay $5,000 up front and another $5,000 when we come back." He looked down at the paper. The numbers were real. His rent was overdue, his truck needed work, and something deeper, something ancient and buried, maybe even fossilized in his own chest, stirred and whispered, "Go." Wes took a breath, picked up the check, and nodded. "When do we leave?" The drive out to Hogback Mesa was long and brutal, the kind of road that rattled bolts loose and tested the patience of man and machine. Wes Calder sat behind the wheel of his aging 4x4, eyes fixed on the long ribbon of dust that stretched ahead. Next to him sat Dr. Aileen Graves, calm and unreadable behind a pair of mirrored sunglasses. In the back seat, her assistant, Jonah, scrolled silently through a tablet, his expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. Wes had agreed to meet them at dawn outside a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. Aileen had packed light, just 2 duffel bags, a case of instruments, and a hard-sided cooler that she refused to let out of her sight. Jonah, younger and more visibly academic, had brought his laptop, a stack of research binders, and a drone. They hadn't spoken much during the ride. The landscape didn't invite conversation. Just endless miles of cracked earth, parched shrubs, and the towering silhouettes of distant mesas, hulking stone giants asleep under a merciless sun. Wes knew the land. He could read it like an old scar, and Hogback was a wound people had stopped talking about. "People don't usually go out here," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I know. That's what makes it perfect." Wes glanced at her. "Perfect for what?" She hesitated. "Let's call it untouched research territory." Jonah shifted in the back. "Technically, the land's not even on current geological surveys. The last documented expedition was in 1974, and they came back early. No reason given." Wes grunted. He remembered that year. Rumors of men who wandered too far and never came back. Strange animal carcasses like they'd been twisted before death. Odd lights at night. Bad air. Magnetic interference. That's what they said back then. I don't believe in superstition, but I do believe in secrets buried by time. By noon, the road had ended. Beyond lay raw terrain. No tire tracks, no signs of civilization. Just stone and sky and silence. They hiked the rest of the way, dragging gear across rock and gravel under a blistering sun. The mesa loomed ahead, a jagged plateau with a spine of dark stone rising like a broken tooth. "Hogback," Wes muttered. The name came from its shape, a long, curved ridge like the back of some buried beast. They set up camp at the base of the rise. Aileen directed the placement of tents with military precision. Jonah assembled the drone and launched it skyward. Wes checked for water sources, mapped the wind direction, and marked an escape route, just in case. That evening, Aileen pulled out a series of high-resolution satellite images. She spread them across a portable table lit by a battery-powered lamp. These were taken 6 months ago. Notice anything? Wes studied the images. The mesa looked different in each image. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but no, the shadows were wrong. The contours seemed to shift. A rock formation present in one image was gone in the next. "It moves," he said slowly. "The land moves." "Not tectonically," Jonah added quickly. "We checked fault lines. This is something else. Fossil beds usually don't shift, but the scans we have show strange heat signatures under the surface, organic patterns, but petrified. Not quite plant, not quite animal." Wes leaned back. "You think there's something alive down there?" "Not alive, but maybe something that was, something we've never classified." That night, Wes couldn't sleep. The wind howled across the mesa like a warning. He sat outside his tent watching the stars flicker overhead. The sky felt too big, too still, as if waiting for something. He heard something. A faint clicking, like stones tapping against each other. He stood slowly and walked toward the sound, flashlight in hand. It came from the edge of the camp, near a pile of boulders. He swept the light across the rocks. Nothing. Then, in the distance, the drone's red light blinked in the sky. It was still hovering, recording everything. Wes returned to his tent, heart ticking faster than it should.
At dawn, they began the dig. Aileen chose a spot near the northern cliff face. The rock there was brittle, dry, layered in ancient sediment. Wes helped set up the gear, though his eyes kept drifting to the surrounding cliffs. They worked in silence for hours, brushing away dust, chipping carefully through stone. Jonah's excitement grew with every layer. "This isn't normal fossilization," he murmured, holding up a shard. "It's too smooth, almost engineered." By midday, they had uncovered the edge of a structure, a curve of something metallic, dark and cold even under the sun. Not bone, not rock. Something buried, yes, but fossil or machine? Aileen's face was pale. "No one mentions this," she said quietly, "until we're sure." Wes felt it again then, that pressure, that strange sense that they were not alone, not watched, but remembered. Jonah reached for another piece of rock. It hissed, just slightly, a sound like steam from a kettle or breath from something ancient. Then silence. They all looked at one another. Wes didn't say it out loud, but the thought was growing louder in his mind. This isn't a fossil dig. It's a tomb.
The morning sun crept over the jagged edge of Hogback Mesa, spilling pale light onto the rocky plain below. It was quiet, too quiet, save for the low groan of wind winding through dry riverbeds and canyons like a whisper from the past. The team broke camp early. There was tension in the air, unspoken but thick. Wes Calder packed the last of the gear into their modified terrain sleds, motorized carts built to navigate rough country. He noticed how Dr. Aileen Graves moved slower than yesterday, like her thoughts weighed heavier with each step. Jonah, ever the optimist, kept checking the drone footage from the night before, eyes narrowing at strange flickers in the infrared scans. Their goal today was simple on paper: cross the Silt Corridor, a dry ravine filled with crumbling shale and ancient river markings, and reach a ridge of hoodoos where preliminary scans had shown anomalies buried just meters beneath the surface. But Wes had a saying: simple plans die first. As they set off, the ground changed beneath their boots. Dirt became dust. Dust turned to powder. The rock underfoot was brittle and sharp, like broken pottery bleached by 1,000 summers. It cracked under their weight. Jonah glanced around nervously. "Why does everything here feel like it's been dead forever?" Wes answered without turning. "Because it has. The land here isn't just dry, it's hollow. It forgets the sound of life." Even the sky seemed thinner, the blue leached out by heat and emptiness. Vultures circled overhead, too far to see clearly, but always there, black dots spinning slowly, patiently. After hours of hiking, they reached a natural pass between two massive stone walls. Strange etchings lined the rocks, weathered by time, half covered by desert dust. They weren't petroglyphs, not indigenous, not natural. Symbols, geometric, repetitive. "Are those—" Jonah trailed off. "Not ours," Aileen murmured. "Not from any culture I know." Wes ran a finger along one symbol, a spiral intersected by jagged lines, like a map or warning. It was warm to the touch. The pass narrowed and the wind grew louder. It whistled and howled like it was trying to say something. Ahead, the land dropped into a basin, bone-white stone cracked by time, and strange heat patterns that pulsed on their scanners like echoes. That's when the world changed. No birds, no wind, no movement. The quiet was so sudden it was violent. Jonah stopped. "Do you feel that?" A low hum filled the air, almost imperceptible, but vibrating in the bones. The hair on Wes's arms rose. He scanned the horizon. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, like time lagging behind the light. "We go back, now," Wes said. Aileen stood frozen, staring at a monolith ahead. It jutted from the ground like a black tooth, smooth, alien, too clean for the surrounding erosion. And near its base, a hole, circular, rimmed in black soot. Not natural, not safe. "We came this far," Aileen said, voice dry. "We finish what we started." The drone buzzed overhead, but the video feed began to glitch. Static lines, corrupted frames. Jonah tapped his controls, frowning. "It's losing signal." They approached the monolith. The wind picked up again, but only inside the basin, swirling around them, dragging fine sand in slow spirals across their boots. Something was breathing here, not alive perhaps, but remembering. As they drew near the hole, the ground trembled, just slightly, enough to loosen rocks from the nearby cliff. One fell with a thud that echoed far too long. Suddenly, a shrill sound tore through the air, not mechanical, not animal, a kind of scream, not from something with lungs, but something ancient and buried. Jonah backed away, eyes wide. "I'm telling you, we leave now!" But it was too late. From the mouth of the hole, something emerged. It wasn't a creature, not in the way one expects. It was a pattern, a shimmer, like heat rising but dense and shaped. For a second, it formed the vague outline of a humanoid figure, then collapsed into smoke. Jonah dropped the drone controls. Aileen whispered, "What the hell did we just see?" They turned and ran, not caring about direction, only escape. The Badlands were a maze, and now they were trapped in its logic. The wind screamed behind them. The desert night fell fast, swallowing the sun behind jagged cliffs in minutes. The temperature dropped sharply, and the once blistering ground cooled to a bone-deep chill. Wes Calder worked methodically, setting up camp at the edge of a rock overhang where the wind wouldn't cut so deep. Aileen and Jonah moved quietly, both still shaken from the encounter near the black monolith. No one had spoken much since their retreat, and the silence between them felt almost sacred, like breaking it might invite something back. Wes unrolled his sleeping bag, but stopped when he noticed something near the edge of the site. Bones. Bleached, brittle bones, scattered and half buried in the sand. He crouched beside them, a partial rib cage, long femurs, small skull fragments. At first glance, they might have belonged to a coyote or desert fox, but something was off. The bones were perfectly clean, no signs of weathering, no tooth marks, no fractures. It was as if the creature had simply lain down and evaporated. No predator had touched these remains, no scavenger either. Wes scanned the surrounding terrain. More bones, half hidden in shallow dust. Dozens of them, some large, some small, all of them disturbingly pristine. Aileen walked over. "Animal remains?" "Too many," Wes said, voice low. "Too clean." Jonah looked up from his gear, like something picked them clean instantly. "No," Wes replied, "like something took everything else." They shared a glance, and the weight of their decision to stay settled even deeper. That night, they built a fire, not for warmth, but for comfort, a false sense of control. The stars were sharp and cold above them, too many to count. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, but the darkness around them felt close and watchful. Jonah tried to break the silence with some dry humor, but even he gave up after a few failed jokes. They turned in early. Wes lay awake in his tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening to the wind rasp across the rocks like dry fingers. Sleep came slow. Then he heard it. Footsteps.
soft, deliberate, pacing outside the perimeter of their camp. Wes sat up slowly and reached for the flashlight near his head. He didn't unzip the tent. He listened. Another step. Crunch. Then another, and a pause. He waited for a sound that never came, the whisper of voices, the drag of equipment, the rustle of animal movement. But it wasn't there. Just footsteps. Wes unzipped the tent with practiced care, barely making a sound. He poked his head out, flashlight off. The fire had burned down to embers, the desert stretched into shadows. Nothing. He waited. Still nothing. He finally turned on the flashlight. The beam cut across the sand and rock, picking up nothing but their gear and the low, flickering glow of the dying fire. And then, just past the reach of light, a shape. Brief, flickering like a figure turning, half seen. Gone. Wes stepped out of the tent completely, the flashlight now in a tight grip. He scanned the full perimeter. Still nothing. No tracks, no prints. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like after a lightning strike. He checked on Aileen and Jonah. Both were asleep, breathing steady, oblivious. Back in his tent, Wes sat upright for hours listening. The footsteps didn't return, but something had changed. The quiet felt different now, thicker, intentional. It wasn't just a bad feeling anymore. It was a warning.
The morning light crept slowly over the red stone ridges, casting long, spindly shadows into the camp. Wes awoke to an odd stillness. No desert breeze, no crackle of the embers, just the absence of sound. He stepped out of his tent and immediately noticed something wrong. Jonah's tent was unzipped, half collapsed. His boots were still there. So was his satchel, drone gear, canteen. Everything, except Jonah himself. Wes's stomach dropped. "Aileen?" he shouted. She emerged moments later, rubbing her eyes. "What is it?" "He's gone." At first, Aileen tried to explain it away. Maybe he'd gone out to take sunrise photos. Maybe he went to relieve himself behind the ridge. But the minutes stretched, then an hour, then 2. They split up, calling his name through the jagged canyons, retracing paths they had taken the day before. No answer. No footprints either. Wes scanned the ground near the edge of camp. No drag marks, no animal signs, nothing to indicate Jonah had ever walked away. That's what scared him most. He knew what lost looked like, what panic looked like. He'd been part of real search and rescue operations in brutal conditions. There were always signs. This place left none. Aileen sat on a rock, pale, clutching Jonah's camera as if it might give her answers. "He wouldn't just walk off," she said. "He's terrified of getting lost." Wes nodded silently. He didn't want to say it, but he knew. Jonah hadn't walked anywhere. He'd vanished. They searched until late afternoon. The desert began to stretch itself again into shadow. Wes turned toward a narrow gulch they hadn't explored, the kind that funneled wind in eerie ways. He descended into it, the rock walls rising around him like teeth. That's when he saw it. Not Jonah. Not fully. It was the body, or what remained of it. Twisted, contorted,
half buried in dust as if the ground itself had tried to swallow it. One arm jutted skyward, fingers locked in a clawed position, mouth open in a silent scream. But his eyes, they were missing. Not gouged, not eaten, just gone, hollow, perfectly smooth sockets like glass had been scooped away. Wes staggered back and fell, bile rising in his throat. No blood, no wounds, just horror. He couldn't explain what he was seeing, the way the body looked dried out, desiccated, like it had been there for years, not hours. Wes forced himself to look around. Symbols had been scratched into the stone beside the body, the same strange spirals and lines they had seen before. Except this time, they were fresher, newly carved, still warm to the touch. Something had watched them, and then taken Jonah. He called out to Aileen. When she arrived and saw what remained of their friend, she didn't scream. She just fell to her knees, frozen. Wes didn't touch the body. They left it there. What else could they do? This wasn't a crime scene. It was something older, deeper. They returned to camp in silence. That night, neither of them slept.
The sun was setting again, dragging the desert into its nightly blackness. But this time, neither Wes nor Aileen cared about setting up camp. They sat in silence, a few feet away from the fire, still processing what they had seen. Jonah's body, or what had been left of it. But the memory wasn't just haunting, it was confusing. It hadn't been a normal corpse. It stood upright, rigid, planted like a sculpture, like someone had carefully posed it to be discovered. Wes replayed every moment from the canyon, the way the torso had been locked into position, arms by the side, legs slightly apart, fingers straight, unnaturally stiff. The body hadn't fallen or collapsed. It had been placed. That night, Wes couldn't stay still. The fire burned low, casting twitching shadows on the nearby rocks. He wandered a few feet from camp, flashlight in hand, scanning the horizon. Then he saw it again, just past the camp boundary. Jonah, or something that looked like him, standing perfectly upright, facing them. Aileen saw it too. That's not... He was dead, Wes. He didn't reply. Instead, he took a few cautious steps forward, flashlight flickering across the figure. It was Jonah. Same clothes, same hair, same posture. But something was off. The eyes were still missing, smooth, hollow sockets as if scooped clean. And now, the mouth was sewn shut. Black thread, tight and deliberate, like someone had taken time to silence him. Aileen gasped behind him. Wes raised his flashlight higher. Jonah's head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging their presence. Then the figure fell. Just collapsed, like a puppet cut from its strings. When they approached, the corpse was cold and lifeless, no change since before. It had moved, and then it hadn't. Aileen whispered, "How is that possible? How can a dead body stand on its own?" Wes didn't answer. He didn't know. But he saw something in the sand near Jonah's feet. Symbols. Spirals and slashes carved into the dust, similar to the ones before, but larger now, bolder, almost unproud. Someone or something was communicating.
They dragged Jonah's corpse away from the camp and buried it beneath a pile of rocks, not because they believed it would keep him down, but because they couldn't stand to see him again like that, propped up, displayed. Eileen didn't speak for hours afterward. She just stared into the fire. Eventually, she whispered, "It's like we're being shown something." "What do you mean?" Wes asked. She looked at him. "Like we're part of some exhibit or ritual. Someone is trying to tell a story, and we're the pieces." The wind picked up, carrying with it a low whistle that almost sounded like a voice. They slept lightly, if at all. The next morning, the rock pile where they buried Jonah was undisturbed. But nearby, carved into the wall of a boulder, was a new symbol, one they hadn't seen before. A circle with a vertical slit running through it, and inside the slit, 2 dots, side by side. Eyes. They stayed by the fire, refusing to sleep. The desert night was cold, but it was no longer just the chill that kept them awake. Something far more unnatural had invaded their thoughts. They had buried Jonah again. They had seen his corpse move, fall, and now they were waiting for whatever would come next. Wes kept the fire stoked. The glow danced wildly across the stone walls, flickering like nervous fingers. Sometime after midnight, Aileen stirred suddenly. "Did you hear that?" Wes froze. He had. A faint crunching sound, gravel underfoot. They both turned toward the darkness beyond the firelight. Then they saw it. Just standing there, half concealed behind a dead juniper bush. A figure, still as stone. It looked like Jonah. Same height, same clothes. But the face... Oh God, the face. The mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, the lips torn at the corners, revealing too many teeth, sharp and uneven. The eyes, once gone, were back but wrong, glassy, colorless, too round, too alert. It wasn't Jonah. It was wearing Jonah, as if his skin was just a costume draped over something else entirely. The thing tilted its head in a twitchy, insect-like motion, a sudden jolt, not fluid, not human. Then it took a single step forward. Wes instinctively raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark and hit the figure. That's when it ran. Not walked, ran. Not away, but around them, fast, low to the ground, scuttling like a spider around the perimeter of the firelight. Wes grabbed Aileen by the arm and yanked her close. He said, "Don't break the circle," referring to the ring of stones and ash around the fire pit. The thing disappeared into the brush. Silence. Then a sound from behind them. A whisper, barely audible. Aileen. It was Jonah's voice, but stretched, distorted, like it had passed through water. She turned, pale, and clutched Wes's coat. That wasn't him. That wasn't him. Wes nodded. He didn't know what it was, but it had learned his voice and his face, and it was using both. "We have to get out of here," Aileen said, breath shallow. Wes agreed, but as he looked out across the darkened ridges and gulches, he felt a deep weight press against his chest. They weren't just being hunted, they were being studied. They didn't sleep that night. They packed their gear at first light, hands trembling. Wes kept his rifle close. Aileen had a flare gun, though neither of them truly believed such tools would work against what they'd seen. As they prepared to leave, Aileen noticed something carved on a flat rock beside the camp. A perfect outline of a human face. Jonah's, stretched and distorted. But something new had been added. Beside the face was a second, incomplete one. Wes's. Still being shaped, still unfinished. Wes swallowed hard.
It wasn't done with them yet.
They left before the sun was fully over the horizon. The desert looked the same. Dry, cracked earth, scattered rock spines, low, thorny brush. But something had changed. The sky felt too still. The wind had gone silent. Even the birds were gone. Wes kept his eyes on the compass strapped to his wrist. But after an hour of walking, the needle began to spin slowly in a circle. He tapped it. No change. Aileen limped behind him, pale and sweat-drenched, her movements sluggish. "I don't think this is the same path," she said between shallow breaths. "That canyon wall, wasn't that behind us?" Wes stopped. He looked around. The canyon wall she was pointing to, he was almost sure they had passed it going away from it. And yet, here it was again, looming to their left. It was impossible. They hadn't turned. "We've been going in circles," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Aileen leaned on a rock. Her lips were dry, and her water bottle was empty. "I think something's playing with us, like it knows what we're trying to do, and it's rearranging the land." Wes didn't want to believe that, but nothing looked familiar anymore. Even the landmarks they used, a crooked tree, a split boulder, had started to shift subtly, like stage props being moved when no one was watching. At noon, the sun hung low in the sky. Too low. It should have been overhead, but it hovered just above the ridgeline, as if time had paused. They walked again. An hour. 2. Same cactus, same burnt log, same hill. Wes tried climbing the hill to scout from the top, but when he reached it, he found no view. Just more hills, too close, too clustered, like someone had crumpled the land into a tight knot. He shouted into the windless sky, but nothing answered. And then Aileen collapsed. He rushed back, dropped beside her. "Hey, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. "I'm so tired. I haven't slept." "I know." He opened his last water pouch. Just a few sips left. She drank, but it wasn't enough. "Wes," she said, barely audible, "I think this place wants us to leave." He nodded, not because he agreed, but because he was starting to feel it too. The dread wasn't just in their minds. The land itself felt alive and hostile. Later, while resting in the shade of a rock overhang, Wes noticed something odd in the dirt. Lines. Faint, but deliberate. They formed a shape, a spiral, etched into the dust as if by fingers or claws. At the center, a human eye. Fresh. Aileen woke with a start and stared at the pattern. "I saw that in my dream," she said quietly. "That shape, it was under my skin." They left quickly, but the maze followed. Every time they thought they had found a new route, it twisted. They would descend a slope, only to find themselves back at the top minutes later. A tree they had passed hours ago stood ahead of them again, identical, including the broken branch Wes had snapped. "It's shifting," Wes muttered, "like it's folding around us." As twilight set in, though the sun still hadn't moved, Aileen pointed at a distant ridge. "There," she said. "Smoke. Look." Wes turned. A thin wisp of smoke curled into the sky. A fire? Another camp? Wes didn't wait. He pulled Aileen to her feet, and they stumbled toward it. But as they climbed the ridge, their surroundings blurred. The rocks beneath their feet looked stretched, like rubber pulled too far. Trees shifted subtly when they weren't looking. The path turned to loose gravel, then to black sand. The smoke was gone. Not vanished, just never there to begin with. A trick.
A lure. A lure. Aileen dropped to her knees, sobbing. Wes stood above her, heart racing. They were rats in a shifting maze, and something was watching. Wes sat with his back against a boulder, arms wrapped around Aileen to keep her warm. She had drifted into a half-sleep, shivering uncontrollably despite the desert heat. The landscape around them had gone quiet again, unnaturally quiet. Even the wind had stopped. They were on the edge of giving up. Then the sound came. Not a howl, not the hiss of shifting sand, but a low, mechanical rumble, deep and steady, growing louder by the second. Wes jumped to his feet. A shape emerged on the ridge. A truck. A beat-up, military-style flatbed rolled slowly down the slope, its engine coughing and sputtering like a long-retired war veteran. Behind the wheel was a man, tall, gaunt, and wrapped in layers of worn canvas. His white beard fluttered in the dry breeze, and he wore old goggles that hid most of his face. The truck stopped a few yards from them. The man didn't speak at first. He looked at them both through the dusty windshield, then climbed out slowly, boots crunching the gravel. He walked with a limp, dragging his right foot behind him. He glanced once at Aileen, then at Wes, before finally nodding. "You're not the first," he said. His voice was rough like sandpaper, but calm. Wes was too stunned to speak. "I've been driving this line for 30 years. I see tracks where there shouldn't be any, hear things at night that don't belong to this world. You're lucky I was close." He pulled 2 wool blankets from the back and handed them to Wes. Aileen stirred. The man helped them into the truck bed without another word. Wes tried to ask questions. "Who are you? How did you find us?" But the man raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't talk. It listens." The truck rattled over the desert, following no road Wes could see, just bare earth and broken stone, but the old man never hesitated. As they drove, the land behind them seemed to shift again, like folds of cloth smoothing out now that they were no longer inside. Wes looked at the horizon. The ridge they had seen hours ago was now behind them. No, above them, as if the whole world had rotated. The man caught him staring. "You were in the hollow. That's what the locals call it. That stretch of desert don't follow the rules. Time gets bent. Place moves when you're not looking. Some folks think it's cursed. I say it's older than curses." Wes swallowed. "We saw things. Something with Jonah's face. It was watching us." The man didn't flinch. "There's things out there. Things that walk without leaving a track. I've seen them too. Folks go missing in the hollow all the time. Most never come out." "Why us?" Aileen whispered. "Because you didn't shoot. You didn't fight it. That's how it gets you. You shoot at something without a shadow, and it takes you." The sun had finally moved again, beginning its descent toward evening as they reached the edge of the hollow. There, just past a jagged outcrop, was a dirt road, real, marked. It led east toward the distant blur of civilization. The man stopped the truck. "This is as far as I go. You take that road, it'll get you to a highway." Wes opened his mouth again, unsure how to thank him, but the man just tossed him a bottle of water. "One last thing. Next time you're in a place that's too quiet, too perfect, and nothing leaves a print behind." He looked Wes square in the eyes. "Walk the other way and never look back." He turned the truck around without waiting for a reply and disappeared into the same shifting desert they'd barely escaped. Wes and Aileen stood in silence for a long time. Then, without a word, they began walking east. The desert wind whispered through the canyon one last time.
Wes stood alone at the edge of the plateau, where the rocky cliffs gave way to scrubland and distant valleys. Behind him, the sun was setting, casting golden light over the ruins of the expedition, scattered gear, cracked water jugs, and his old hunting pack lying in the dust like a forgotten memory. Aileen was gone. She had left that morning without a word. They hadn't spoken much after the ride out of the hollow. The silence between them wasn't bitter, it was shell-shocked. There were no words left for what they'd seen or what they had become. She'd taken the first outbound bus. Wes had walked her to the stop, hands deep in his pockets, the way he used to do when waiting for something that would never arrive. "Don't stay too long," she'd said, climbing aboard. "I won't," he lied. That night, he made the fire. It took time. The air was dry, the brush brittle, but he wasn't in a rush. Every item he added to the pile came with a memory. His reinforced boots, stained with desert dust, the notebook with terrain sketches, the metal case with his old rifle, dismantled and rusted, and finally the photograph of him and Jonah, taken years ago on another dig, both of them grinning, younger, whole. The match sparked. The flames caught quickly, licking upward like eager tongues. He sat cross-legged nearby, the firelight dancing in his tired eyes. This wasn't about purification. It wasn't about revenge. It was about letting go. The hollow had changed him. There had been too many moments that didn't fit into logic, too many footprints that didn't belong to anyone, and too many sounds that came from nowhere. Wes knew he could never explain it. The world outside wouldn't understand, and frankly, he didn't want it to. But he understood one thing. There were places in this world where rules didn't apply, where time unraveled and memory frayed like rope in acid. Hogback Ridge, the hollow, whatever you called it, it was alive, and it didn't like visitors. He thought of Jonah. He thought of the thing that wore Jonah's face. And he thought of the old man's warning. Don't shoot what leaves no prints. Don't follow shadows that don't shift. The fire crackled louder, sparks swirled up into the night, and Wes closed his eyes. In the glow behind his eyelids, he could still see the desert, the broken stones, the sun that never seemed to move, and the emptiness that pressed on your chest like a second body. He took the last item from his jacket, a tiny fossil. It wasn't from the hollow. He wasn't even sure how it got into his bag. But when he held it up to the firelight, the ridges on the stone almost moved, as if breathing. Wes stared at it for a long time, and then slowly he tossed it into the flames. The fire screamed. Only for a second, a high, thin wail, like metal being torn in space. Then it was gone. The flame dimmed back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Wes didn't flinch. By morning, the fire had burnt itself down to ash. He buried the remains under loose rocks, not because he thought someone would find them, but because it felt right, like burying an old friend or an old enemy. He walked back to the town on foot. No maps, no guides, just the road ahead and silence behind. He didn't look back once. Months later, Wes found work in a coastal town, far from the desert. He repaired boats, kept to himself, and only spoke when spoken to. At night, he wrote in a notebook, though he never signed his name. Sometimes he dreamed of footprints appearing in sand where no one had walked, but he always woke up before anything could follow them.